The moment those words left Leela's mouth, the air in the room seemed to collapse in on itself. I remember sitting there, staring at her face, waiting for the punchline that never came. My first instinct was to believe she had said something ridiculous after too much wine, but Leela wasn't drunk. Her voice had been calm, careful, deliberate, and the look in her eyes wasn't playful or embarrassed. It was serious, almost hopeful. For several seconds, I couldn't speak at all. My brain kept trying to rearrange her sentence into something less disturbing. Maybe she meant she admired Daniel. Maybe she meant she sometimes wondered what life would be like if she had married someone like him. But the way she had said it left no room for confusion. Finally, I forced out a laugh that sounded weak even to my own ears. "Leela, that's not funny." She didn't laugh with me. She didn't even smile. She just watched me the way someone watches a storm forming on the horizon, quietly waiting to see how bad it will get. "I'm not joking," she said softly. A strange heaviness settled into my chest. "Then you need to explain what you mean," I replied. My voice sounded firmer than I felt. Leela leaned back in her chair, folding her arms loosely as if she'd been preparing for this conversation for years. "I've thought about this a lot," she said, "probably longer than I should admit." My heart started beating faster. Upstairs, I could hear Daniel's footsteps moving across the floor, and suddenly the sound felt distant, like it belonged to another world. Down here, in the quiet glow of the dining room light, it felt like reality had tilted slightly off balance. "Leela," I said carefully, "you're talking about my husband." She nodded slowly. "I know." The calmness in her voice made the situation feel even more surreal. If she had sounded ashamed or nervous, maybe I could have responded differently. But there was no shame in her expression, no hesitation, just a quiet certainty that made my stomach twist. "Why would you say something like that?" I asked. She sighed softly and rubbed her fingers along the rim of her empty glass. "Because it's the truth," she said, "and pretending it isn't there hasn't made it go away." I stared at her, trying to recognize the person sitting across from me. This was the same woman who had comforted me through heartbreak, who had held my daughter when she was born, who had stood beside me at my wedding smiling proudly like a sister. But suddenly she felt like a stranger wearing Leela's face. "You can't seriously think this is okay," I said. "You can't just ask someone to share their husband." Leela tilted her head slightly, as if considering my reaction with curiosity. "I didn't say it would be easy," she replied, "but relationships are complicated. People are complicated." The words sounded rehearsed, like something she had practiced in her mind. I felt a sharp wave of anger rise inside my chest. "No," I said firmly, "some things are actually very simple." For the first time that evening, her expression shifted. A flicker of frustration crossed her face, but it disappeared quickly. "You're reacting emotionally, which I understand, but if you think about it logically—" "Logically?" I interrupted. "You think there's a logical argument for sharing my husband?" She didn't flinch at my tone. Instead, she leaned forward slightly, lowering her voice as if she were explaining something delicate. "I'm not asking you to lose him," she said. "I'm asking you to consider the possibility that love doesn't always belong to just one person." My hands tightened around the edge of the table. "Daniel isn't a piece of furniture we divide between us. He's my husband." "And he would still be your husband," she replied quickly. "I'm not trying to take him away." The calm conviction in her voice made my anger deepen. "Then what exactly are you trying to do?" I demanded. She looked at me with an expression that almost resembled sadness. "I'm trying to finally be honest," she said. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The silence between us felt heavy and unfamiliar, like walking through a house where the furniture had been rearranged overnight. My thoughts raced back through the past 20 years of our friendship, searching for signs I might have missed. Had she always felt this way? Had every dinner, every holiday, every conversation carried this secret beneath the surface? The thought made my chest ache. "How long?" I asked quietly. Leela didn't pretend to misunderstand. She knew exactly what I was asking. She hesitated for a moment before answering. "Almost since the beginning," she admitted. The words landed like a physical blow. "Since the beginning of what?" My voice sounded hollow. "Since you met him." I felt the room spin slightly. "You've been in love with my husband for years?" She looked down at her hands. I tried not to be. A bitter laugh escaped me before I could stop it. "That's supposed to make me feel better?" She looked up again, her eyes filled with a strange mixture of vulnerability and determination. "I never planned for it to happen, but sometimes feelings exist whether we want them to or not." I shook my head slowly, disbelief flooding through me. "You had 20 years to tell me, 20 years to step back from our lives if it was that hard for you." Her gaze softened. "And lose you?" she asked quietly. The question caught me off guard. "You're my best friend. You're the closest thing I have to family." For a moment, I almost felt sympathy. Almost. But then I remembered the conversation we were having. "Friends don't ask for things like this," I said firmly. Leela exhaled slowly, as if she had expected that response. "I knew you would react this way at first, but I hoped that eventually you might understand." I stared at her in disbelief. "Understand what?" She held my gaze steadily. "That sometimes life gives us a connection that's too strong to ignore, and maybe, just maybe, we're meant to find a way to make it work." My anger surged again. "Daniel isn't a piece of furniture we divide between us. He's my husband." "And he would still be your husband," she replied quickly. "I'm not trying to take him away." The calm conviction in her voice made my anger deepen. "Then what exactly are you trying to do?" I demanded. She looked at me with an expression that almost resembled sadness. "I'm trying to finally be honest," she said. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The silence between us felt heavy and unfamiliar, like walking through a house where the furniture had been rearranged overnight. My thoughts raced back through the past 20 years of our friendship, searching for signs I might have missed. Had she always felt this way? Had every dinner, every holiday, every conversation carried the secret beneath the surface? The thought made my chest ache. "How long?" I asked quietly. Leela didn't pretend to misunderstand. She knew exactly what I was asking. She hesitated for a moment before answering. "Almost since the beginning," she admitted. The words landed like a physical blow. "Since the beginning of what?" My voice sounded hollow. "Since you met him." I felt the room spin slightly. "You've been in love with my husband for years?" She looked down at her hands. I tried not to be. A bitter laugh escaped me before I could stop it. "That's supposed to make me feel better?" She looked up again, her eyes filled with a strange mixture of vulnerability and determination. "I never planned for it to happen, but sometimes feelings exist whether we want them to or not." I shook my head slowly, disbelief flooding through me. "You had 20 years to tell me, 20 years to step back from our lives if it was that hard for you." Her gaze softened. "And lose you?" she asked quietly. The question caught me off guard. "You're my best friend. You're the closest thing I have to family." For a moment, I almost felt sympathy. Almost. But then I remembered the conversation we were having. "Friends don't ask for things like this," I said firmly. Leela exhaled slowly, as if she had expected that response. "I knew you would react this way at first, but I hoped that eventually you might understand." I stared at her in disbelief. "Understand what?" She held my gaze steadily. "That sometimes life gives us a connection that's too strong to ignore, and maybe, just maybe, we're meant to find a way to make it work." My anger surged again. "Daniel isn't a piece of furniture we divide between us. He's my husband." "And he would still be your husband," she replied quickly. "I'm not trying to take him away." The calm conviction in her voice made my anger deepen. Then what exactly are you trying to do? I demanded. She looked at me with an expression that almost resembled sadness. I'm trying to finally be honest, she said. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The silence between us felt heavy and unfamiliar, like walking through a house where the furniture had been rearranged overnight. My thoughts raced back through the past 20 years of our friendship, searching for signs I might have missed. Had she always felt this way? Had every dinner, every holiday, every conversation carried the secret beneath the surface? The thought made my chest ache. How long? I asked quietly. Leela didn't pretend to misunderstand. She knew exactly what I was asking. She hesitated for a moment before answering. Almost since the beginning, she admitted. The words landed like a physical blow. The moment Lila said those words, something inside my chest tightened so sharply it almost hurt to breathe. For a few seconds, I simply stared at her, searching her face for any sign that she was exaggerating or twisting the truth to justify her feelings. But Lila's expression remained calm, steady, almost patient. It was the expression of someone who believed she had already crossed the point of no return and was simply waiting for the other person to catch up. You might want to ask him how he feels about me. The sentence echoed in my mind like a distant bell. I forced myself to speak, though my voice came out quieter than I intended. What exactly are you trying to say? Lila didn't answer immediately. She leaned back in her chair again, studying me carefully as if weighing how much to reveal. I'm saying, she began slowly, that feelings don't always belong to just one person. My heart pounded harder. Stop speaking in riddles. Her gaze softened slightly. I'm not saying Daniel has betrayed you. The fact that she needed to say that at all made my stomach twist. But, she continued, choosing her words carefully, sometimes there are connections between people that are complicated. A cold sensation spread through my arms. You're implying he feels something for you. I'm saying he understands me, she replied quietly. That's not the same thing. No, it isn't. For a moment, the only sound in the room was the faint ticking of the kitchen clock. Each second felt heavier than the last. Upstairs, Daniel's footsteps moved again, and I realized with sudden clarity that he had no idea what kind of conversation was unfolding just a few feet below him. Have you told him how you feel? I asked. She hesitated. That hesitation felt louder than any confession. You have, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. She looked down at the table for a moment before answering. Not in the way you think. That's not an answer. She sighed softly. We've talked. The words struck like a hammer. Talked about what? I demanded. About life, about relationships, about what people really want but are afraid to admit. My chest tightened again. And you told him you love him? Lila's silence answered the question. I pushed my chair back slightly, suddenly needing space, air, anything that would stop the feeling of pressure building in my lungs. When? I asked. Her voice dropped lower. About a year ago. A year. For 12 months, this secret had been floating somewhere in my life while I went on believing everything was normal. And you're just telling me now? I said. I needed to know if the feeling would fade. Did it? No. The honesty in that single word made my anger flare again. What did Daniel say? Lila met my eyes again, but this time her gaze carried a trace of caution. He said he cared about you very much. That's not what I asked. I know. Then answer the question. She inhaled slowly before speaking again. He said, life is complicated. My heart sank deeper. That's the kind of vague answer people give when they don't want to admit the truth, I said bitterly. Lila didn't argue, and that silence frightened me more than anything she had said so far. My mind began replaying moments from the past year with a new disturbing perspective. Had Daniel acted differently around her? Had there been small glances, pauses in conversation, shared jokes that I had dismissed at the time? The more I thought about it, the more uncertain my memories became. "You're lying," I said suddenly. Lila blinked. "You're twisting things to make it sound like there's something between you two." My voice rose slightly. "Daniel would have told me." "You're sure about that?" she asked quietly. The question struck deeper than she probably intended. Of course I believe my husband would tell me something like that. Didn't I? My thoughts felt tangled, like threads pulled too tightly. "Why are you doing this?" I asked. Lila looked genuinely confused. Doing what? Trying to plant doubt in my marriage. Her expression softened again. "I'm not planting doubt. I'm asking you to acknowledge something that's already there." "There is nothing there," I snapped. She didn't respond immediately. Instead, she studied me with an almost sympathetic expression that made my anger flare again. "You've always trusted people very easily," she said after a moment. "Are you criticizing me for trusting my husband?" "No," she said quickly. "I'm saying trust doesn't mean ignoring reality." I stood up from the table. The room suddenly felt too small, the air too thick. "Reality?" I repeated. "Yes. My reality is that you're sitting in my house telling me you love my husband and expect me to accept it." Lila remained seated, watching me carefully. "I don't expect you to accept it tonight." That sentence made me stop pacing. "Tonight?" She nodded slowly. "I've had years to process these feelings. You've had 5 minutes." The calm logic of her words made them sound almost reasonable, which somehow made the situation even more unsettling. "So you think this is a conversation we're going to continue?" "I hope so." "Why?" "Because if we don't talk about it honestly," she said, "it will destroy all of us eventually." The statement hung in the air between us. For the first time that night, fear crept beneath my anger. "What exactly are you suggesting happens next?" I asked carefully. Lila looked up at me, and for the first time, her voice carried a note of vulnerability. "I think you should talk to Daniel." My laugh was sharp and humorless. "Oh, I'm definitely going to talk to him." "That's not what I meant." "Then explain." She stood up slowly now, facing me across the table. "I think you should ask him the same question I asked you tonight." "What question?" Her eyes held mine steadily. "Whether love always has to belong to just one person." The implication behind the sentence felt like ice sliding down my spine. "You actually think my husband is going to agree with you?" "I think," she replied carefully, "that he deserves the chance to be honest." A heavy silence followed. For years, I had trusted Lila with every part of my life. Now I couldn't decide whether she was revealing a hidden truth or trying to destroy everything I loved. From upstairs came the faint sound of Daniel's office chair rolling across the floor. He was probably finishing his email, completely unaware that the foundation of our marriage was suddenly under question. I turned back toward the stairs. "I'm going to ask him right now." Lila's voice stopped me before I could take the first step. You might not like the answer. I turned slowly to face her. After tonight, I'm not sure I like anything anymore. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then she spoke again, her voice almost gentle. Just remember, whatever he says, the truth was already there before I opened my mouth. Her words followed me as I walked toward the stairs, my heart pounding harder with every step. Because for the first time in my marriage, I wasn't sure what I was about to hear. The staircase suddenly felt longer than it ever had before. Each step creaked softly beneath my feet, and with every movement, my heart beat harder against my ribs. I remember gripping the railing, as if it might steady the chaos inside my chest. Downstairs, Leela remained in the dining room. I could feel her presence behind me even without turning around, as if her confession had filled the entire house like smoke that refused to clear. At the top of the stairs, the hallway light was dim, casting long shadows across the carpet. Daniel's office door was half open, and I could hear the faint clicking of his keyboard. That normal, ordinary sound made everything feel strangely unreal. Just minutes ago, my world had been stable, predictable, safe. Now it felt like I was walking toward a door that might completely change my life. I paused outside the office, my hand hovering near the doorframe. For a moment, doubt crept into my mind. What if Leela was exaggerating? What if she had misunderstood something Daniel said months ago and built an entire fantasy around it? If I stormed in, accusing him of feelings he didn't have, I might create a problem that didn't exist. But then her voice echoed again in my memory. You might want to ask him how he feels about me. The calm certainty in her tone made hesitation impossible. I pushed the door open. Daniel looked up immediately from his laptop, his expression warm and relaxed in the way it always was when he saw me. Hey, he said with a small smile. Everything okay? For a second, I simply looked at him. The familiarity of his face made my throat tighten unexpectedly. This man had been my partner for nearly 2 decades. We had built a home together, raised a child together, shared every ordinary moment of life. And now a single conversation downstairs had made me question something I had never doubted before. I need to talk to you, I said. Something in my tone must have reached him immediately because his smile faded slightly. He closed the laptop and turned his chair toward me. What's wrong? I stepped into the room and closed the door behind me. Did you know Leela is in love with you? The words came out faster than I intended, but once they were spoken, there was no taking them back. Daniel froze. Not dramatically, not with shock or outrage. He simply became very still. That stillness made my stomach drop. You talked to her? He asked carefully. The question wasn't denial, it was confirmation. Yes, I replied. I talked to her. He leaned back slightly in his chair, running a hand across his face as if gathering his thoughts. How much did she tell you? He asked carefully. My chest tightened. She told me she's been in love with you for years, I said slowly. She told me you two talked about it a year ago. Daniel didn't interrupt. He just listened. And she told me, I continued, struggling to keep my voice steady, that maybe I should ask you how you feel about her. The silence that followed felt enormous. Daniel looked down at the floor for a moment, his expression thoughtful in a way I had never seen before. Is that true? I asked quietly. He inhaled slowly. Yes, he said. The word landed like a stone dropping into deep water. So she confessed her feelings to you? Yes. And you didn't tell me? He looked up at me then, and there was something complicated in his eyes, something that looked almost like regret. I didn't want to hurt you. A sharp laugh escaped my throat. That's ironic. I'm serious, he replied gently. I crossed my arms tightly, trying to hold myself together. What exactly happened during that conversation? I asked. Daniel hesitated for a moment before answering. She told me she had feelings she couldn't ignore anymore. And I told her that nothing could ever happen between us. Relief flickered briefly in my chest, but it didn't last long. Then why didn't you tell me? Daniel sighed quietly. Because I thought it would pass. Leela has always been emotional about certain things. I believed if I made it clear there was no future there, she would eventually move on. But she didn't. No. My chest felt tight again. Did you ever encourage her feelings? I asked carefully. Daniel's answer came quickly. No. Not even accidentally? He shook his head firmly. I've always been careful with her. Careful how? Daniel paused. Careful not to give her the wrong impression. Something about that phrasing bothered me. What kind of impression could you possibly give? He hesitated again. Leela is perceptive, he said. She notices small things. That doesn't answer my question. Daniel looked at me directly now. I've always respected her feelings. The sentence made my stomach twist. Respecting someone's feelings isn't the same as rejecting them. I did reject them, but gently. And now she's downstairs asking if I'd be willing to share my husband. Daniel's eyebrows lifted slightly. She said that? Yes. He leaned back in his chair again, looking genuinely surprised. I didn't expect her to take it that far. Anger flared in my chest again. You didn't expect it? I repeated. She's been in love with you for years, and you thought it would just fade away? I hoped it would. The honesty in his answer made it difficult to argue, but it didn't ease the unease spreading through me. Daniel, I said slowly, I need you to answer one question honestly. Okay. Do you have feelings for her? The room fell silent again. This time the silence lasted longer. Too long. Daniel didn't look away from me, but he didn't answer immediately either, and that pause alone made my heart sink. Finally, he spoke. I care about her, he said. That's not what I asked. He inhaled quietly. She's important to you, which means she's important to me. That's still not an answer. I felt my voice trembling slightly now. Daniel, do you have feelings for my best friend? Another pause. This one felt even heavier than the last. Then he said something that made the floor beneath my feet feel suddenly unstable. He said carefully, I think the situation is more complicated than a simple yes or no. My heart dropped into my stomach. Downstairs, Leela was waiting, and suddenly I realized the conversation I had just walked into might not end the way I hoped. Because for the first time since our marriage began, I wasn't entirely sure where Daniel stood. For several seconds after Daniel said those words, I couldn't speak. The sentence lingered in the air like something fragile and dangerous at the same time, more complicated than a simple yes or no. My mind kept repeating it, trying to understand what it truly meant. Because in marriage, some questions are supposed to have very simple answers. I finally found my voice, though it came out quieter than I intended. What exactly does that mean? Daniel remained seated, his hands clasped loosely in front of him. He looked thoughtful, careful, as if he understood that every word he chose in this moment would matter. It means feelings aren't always black and white, he said. The answer made something inside me tighten. That's not reassuring, I replied. He nodded slowly. I know. I walked toward the window, staring out into the dark backyard where the porch light cast a faint glow across the grass. I needed a moment to collect my thoughts before I said something I might regret. So let me understand this, I said after a moment. My best friend tells me she's in love with my husband, and when I ask my husband how he feels, his answer is that it's complicated. Daniel stood up slowly behind me. I didn't say I love her, he said gently. But you didn't say you don't. That silence returned again, heavy and uncomfortable. I turned to face him. Daniel? Yes? I need honesty right now, not careful wording, not gentle explanations, just the truth. He nodded. Okay. Have you ever thought about being with Leela? The question hung between us like a loaded weapon. Daniel's eyes lowered briefly before he answered. Yes. The word struck me like a slap. I felt my breath catch in my chest. You thought about it? Yes. How many times? I don't know. My stomach twisted painfully. So while we were living our life, raising our daughter, building this home, you were imagining a future with my best friend? That's not what I said, he replied quickly. Then explain it. Daniel rubbed the back of his neck, clearly uncomfortable now. Thoughts aren't always plans, he said. Daniel? He looked directly at me again. When someone tells you they have feelings for you, it forces you to examine your own emotions, even if you never intended to. That sounds like a very thoughtful way of saying you considered it. I considered the situation, he corrected, which includes considering her. He didn't argue. That silence again, and every time it happened, it felt like another small crack forming in something I had believed was unbreakable. How far did those thoughts go? I asked quietly. Daniel took a slow breath. I imagined what life would be like if things had been different, he admitted. My throat tightened. Different how? If I had met her first. The sentence echoed in my ears. For years, I had believed that Daniel and I were each other's inevitable story, that the moment we met in that bookstore cafe had been the beginning of something that was meant to happen. But now he was calmly admitting he had imagined a different version of that story, one where I wasn't the woman he married. You never told me that. No. Why not? Because it wasn't real. But the thoughts were. Yes. I turned away again, feeling suddenly exhausted. Downstairs, Leela was still sitting in our dining room, waiting. The realization made my chest tighten again. Did she ever ask you to leave me? Daniel's answer came quickly. No. Did she ever suggest something like what she suggested tonight? No. That surprised me. Then where did she get the idea? I don't know. She seemed very confident that you might agree with her. He thought about that for a moment. Maybe she misunderstood something I said. What exactly did you say? Daniel hesitated again. That relationships are complicated, he admitted. I closed my eyes briefly. You really like that sentence, don't you? It's true. Yes, I said quietly, but it's also very convenient. He didn't respond. I walked toward the door slowly, my mind spinning with everything I had just learned. Before opening it, I turned back toward him. There's one more thing I need to know. Daniel waited. When she told you she loved you, what did you feel? That question seemed harder for him than the others. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked down to the floor for several seconds. Finally, he spoke. I felt surprised. And flattered. The honesty of that answer hurt more than any lie would have. And after the surprise? I asked quietly. Daniel's voice softened. I felt conflicted. Because, he looked up at me again, because I care about both of you. My chest tightened painfully. That's not the same kind of caring. No, he admitted. The quiet truth in his voice made something inside me crumble a little. For years, I had believed my marriage was built on certainty. Now I was realizing it had always contained questions I never knew existed. Leela is downstairs, I said finally. Daniel's expression shifted slightly. I know. She asked me if love always has to belong to just one person. He exhaled slowly. That sounds like something she would say. I studied his face carefully. And what do you think? I asked. Daniel didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked toward the closed office door, as if aware that the woman we were discussing was only a floor away. Then he said something that made my stomach drop again. I think people are capable of loving more than one person. The room felt suddenly very quiet, because in that moment I realized something deeply unsettling. The conversation downstairs had not created a problem, it had revealed one. And for the first time in our marriage, I had no idea how to fix it. For a long moment after Daniel said those words, neither of us moved. The silence between us was thick and unfamiliar, like standing in a room that used to feel like home but suddenly didn't anymore. I studied his face, searching for something. Certainty, reassurance, regret, anything that might anchor me to the man I thought I knew. But Daniel simply looked tired. Not guilty, not defensive, just tired. I need to understand something, I said quietly. He nodded. If people can love more than one person, are you saying that's what's happening here? Daniel rubbed his hands together slowly before answering. I'm saying emotions aren't always simple, he replied. That's still not a clear answer. I know. My chest tightened again. I had never realized how frustrating Daniel's calm nature could be until this moment. Usually it was something I loved about him. He was steady when I was emotional, thoughtful when I reacted quickly. But right now, his careful words felt like fog hiding something I needed to see clearly. Do you love her? I asked. Daniel's eyes lifted to mine. No, he said. The answer came quickly this time. Too quickly. And yet you just told me people can love more than one person. Yes. So which one is it? I don't love Leela, he repeated, but I understand her. I exhaled slowly. Daniel, she asked me if she could share you. His eyebrows lifted slightly. I know. She believes there's something between you. That doesn't mean there is. But you admitted you imagined being with her. He nodded once. That's not the same as wanting it. My mind struggled to accept the distinction he was making. You realize how confusing this sounds, right? Yes. And you're okay with leaving it that way? No, he said quietly, but honesty sometimes sounds messy. I turned toward the door again, my thoughts spinning. Leela was downstairs waiting for an answer to a question I never imagined I would have to face. And now Daniel had complicated that answer in ways I didn't know how to process. What are you going to do? He asked. I paused. About what? About Leela. The question felt heavier than it should have. She crossed a line tonight. Yes, but she's also been my best friend for 20 years. Daniel nodded slowly. That makes it harder. I leaned against the door frame, suddenly feeling the weight of every memory I had with Leela. Sleepovers when we were teenagers, late-night phone calls during college, the day she held Emily in the hospital with tears in her eyes. All of those moments were still real, but now they existed beside something darker. "How long did you know she felt this way?" I asked again. "About a year. And in that entire year, nothing happened between you two?" Daniel met my gaze directly. "No." The firmness in his voice reassured me slightly, but it didn't erase the unease still twisting inside my chest. "Did you ever see her alone without telling me?" "Yes," he admitted. My stomach tightened. "When?" "Mostly when she stopped by while you were at work." I blinked. "She visited the house?" "Sometimes." "And you didn't think that was important to mention?" "I didn't think it meant anything," he said. The calmness of his answer made my frustration rise again. "You didn't think it meant anything that my best friend was visiting my husband privately after confessing she loved him?" Daniel sighed. "I was trying to keep things normal." "That's not normal." "No," he admitted. For a moment, neither of us spoke again. Then Daniel said something that caught me completely off guard. "She never tried to cross a boundary." I frowned. "What do you mean?" "She never flirted, never touched me, never tried to make anything happen." That surprised me. "Then what did you two talk about?" "Life," he said. "Her loneliness, her confusion about why she couldn't move on." A strange ache formed in my chest. Part of me wanted to be angry at her. Another part remembered the countless nights we had comforted each other through heartbreak. "Did you ever encourage her to hope for something more?" I asked carefully. "No." "But you also didn't shut the door completely." Daniel hesitated. "I told her I was committed to my marriage." "That's not the same thing as saying there's no chance." He didn't argue. That silence again, and every time it appeared, it felt like another piece of the truth revealing itself slowly. "Daniel," softly I said, "do you think she believes you might choose her someday?" He looked genuinely troubled by the question. "I hope not. But do you think it's possible she does?" He thought about that for a long moment before answering. "Yes." The honesty of that admission made my chest tighten again. "Then tonight isn't just about her feelings," I said slowly. "No, it's about the possibility she thinks you share them." Daniel didn't respond, but his silence told me everything I needed to know. Downstairs, the faint sound of a chair moving echoed up through the floorboards. Leela was still there, waiting. "Are you going to talk to her?" Daniel asked. "Yes." "Do you want me there?" I considered the question for a moment. Then I shook my head. "No." "Why not?" "Because this conversation started between me and her, and it needs to end the same way." Daniel nodded. But before I opened the door, he spoke again. "There's something you should know." I turned back toward him. "What?" He looked uneasy now in a way he hadn't before. "When she confessed her feelings last year, she said something similar to what she said tonight." My stomach tightened. "Similar how?" Daniel's voice dropped slightly. "She believed fate had made a mistake." The exact same words Leela had used downstairs earlier. "And what did you say to that?" I asked. Daniel hesitated before answering. "I told her fate isn't something we fix by breaking other people." The sentence should have comforted me, but instead it made me realize something deeply unsettling. Leela had already heard Daniel's answer once, and yet she was still downstairs asking the same question again. which meant she either believed he'd changed his mind or she believed I might. I opened the office door slowly. "Whatever happens next," Daniel said quietly behind me, "I'm here." I nodded, but I didn't reply, because the truth was, I didn't know if here meant the same thing it used to. As I walked toward the staircase again, my heart pounding harder with every step, one thought kept repeating in my mind. The woman waiting downstairs wasn't just my best friend anymore. She was someone who believed my marriage had taken something that belonged to her. And tonight, she had decided it was time to ask it back. When I reached the bottom of the stairs, the house felt different. The same walls, the same furniture, the same soft glow from the dining room light, but something about the atmosphere had shifted. It felt heavier, like the air itself was waiting for something to happen. Lila was exactly where I had left her. She sat at the dining table with her hands folded together, staring at the surface of the wood as if she had been studying the same spot for a very long time. When she heard my footsteps, she slowly looked up. The moment our eyes met, she seemed to search my face for an answer. "Well?" she asked quietly. Her voice carried a calmness that unsettled me. It was the tone of someone who expected the conversation to continue, not someone who feared they had just destroyed a friendship. I walked into the room slowly and pulled out the chair across from her. My hands felt strangely cold as I sat down. "I talked to him," I said. Lila nodded once, as if that outcome had been inevitable. "And?" she asked. I studied her face carefully before answering. "He confirmed that you told him you had feelings last year." She didn't look surprised. "I assumed he would." "And he told me you two talked about it." "Yes." Her honesty was almost disarming. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then Lila leaned forward slightly. "What did he say about me?" The directness of the question caught me off guard. "He said he cares about you," I replied. Something softened in her expression. "But he also said he's committed to our marriage." Her shoulders lowered slightly, though I couldn't tell if it was relief or disappointment. "That sounds like Daniel," she said quietly. I watched her carefully. "He also admitted something else." Lila's eyes sharpened. "What?" "He said he's thought about what life would be like if he had met you first." For the first time that evening, genuine emotion flashed across her face. Hope. It appeared quickly, like a spark catching dry wood. "And?" she asked. "And he said those thoughts don't mean he wants to leave me." Her expression steadied again, though the spark didn't disappear entirely. "That's fair," she said softly. The calm acceptance in her tone made my stomach twist. "Fair?" I repeated. "Yes. You're talking about my husband imagining a life with you like it's a normal conversation." Lila met my gaze evenly. "Because it is." "No, it isn't. It's human," she replied. My frustration surged again. "You don't get to redefine my marriage to make yourself feel better." "I'm not redefining it. I'm acknowledging something that already exists." "That's not true." "Isn't it?" Her quiet confidence irritated me more than outright hostility would have. "Daniel told me something else." "What?" "He said when you confessed your feelings last year, he told you fate isn't something we fix by breaking other people." Lila nodded slowly. "Yes, he did." "Then why are we having this conversation tonight?" Her eyes softened again. "Because sometimes people need time to see things clearly." The answer made my chest tighten. "You really believe he's going to change his mind someday?" Lila didn't respond immediately. Instead, she looked down at her hands for a moment before speaking again. "I believe life is complicated." That sentence sounds very familiar tonight. She smiled faintly. Daniel says it a lot. I leaned back in my chair, suddenly exhausted. Lila, you've been my best friend for 20 years. I know. You stood beside me at my wedding. Yes, you held my daughter the day she was born. Her voice softened. I remember. Then how can you sit here and calmly ask me to share my husband? For the first time that evening, real emotion surfaced in her eyes. Because I didn't choose these feelings, she said quietly, but you chose to act on them tonight. I chose to be honest. Honesty isn't always kindness. She absorbed that statement silently. Then she spoke again, her voice gentler than before. Do you know what it feels like to spend years pretending you don't love someone? The vulnerability in her tone caught me off guard. No, I admitted. It's exhausting. Every dinner, every holiday, every moment watching the two of you together. Her words painted a picture I had never considered before. I tried to move on. I dated other people. I told myself it was just a phase. But it wasn't. No. The room grew quiet again. I never meant to hurt you, she added softly. I believe that, I said. She looked surprised. But believing it doesn't make this okay. I know. Another silence settled between us. Then Lila asked a question I hadn't expected. Did he say he imagined meeting you first? Yes. Her gaze drifted towards the window. I've imagined that too, she said. Something in her voice sounded almost wistful. Sometimes I picture a different timeline, one where I met him first and things unfolded differently. The thought made my chest tighten. But that's not what happened, I said firmly. No, she agreed. So why keep living in that fantasy? She looked back at me. Because sometimes the difference between reality and possibility is just timing. The statement hung in the air like a quiet challenge. Timing doesn't entitle you to someone else's life. I replied. Lila nodded slowly. You're right. The simplicity of her agreement surprised me. But it also doesn't erase what people feel. I rubbed my temples, trying to steady the whirlwind in my mind. What exactly are you hoping for here? I asked. Her answer came quietly. Clarity. You already have it, I said. Daniel chose his marriage. Yes, and I'm not sharing my husband. She didn't argue. Instead, she asked something that made my stomach drop slightly. Did he say he loves you? The question felt oddly personal coming from her. Yes, I replied. Her eyes studied my face carefully. And did he say he doesn't love me? I hesitated, just slightly. But that pause was enough. Lila noticed. And in that tiny moment of silence, the fragile balance between us shifted again. Because suddenly, she knew there was still a question neither of us had fully answered. The moment Lila noticed my hesitation, something changed in her expression. It wasn't triumph exactly, and it wasn't cruelty. It was something quieter. Something that looked almost like confirmation of a suspicion she had carried for a very long time. You hesitated, she said softly. The observation hung between us like a spotlight I couldn't escape. I was thinking, I replied. No, she said gently, shaking her head. You were remembering. My stomach tightened. What do you mean? Lila leaned back in her chair, studying me the way she used to when we were younger and she could tell I was hiding something. Daniel didn't say he loves me, but he also didn't say he doesn't. Her words echoed my own thoughts from upstairs. That doesn't mean anything, I said quickly. It means something to me. The calm conviction in her voice made my chest ache. Lila, this isn't a puzzle you get to solve. I'm not trying to solve it, she replied quietly. I'm trying to live with it. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The clock on the wall ticked slowly, marking seconds that felt heavier than they should. You asked me earlier why I told you tonight, she said. Yes. The truth is, I was getting tired of pretending. I watched her carefully. Pretending what? That everything was normal. It was normal. No, she said gently, it was comfortable. The distinction made my chest tighten again. There's a difference, she continued. Normal means things are the way they're supposed to be. Comfortable means people are ignoring what they already know. Are you suggesting I knew about this? Not consciously. Her answer unsettled me. But I think part of you sensed something, she added. I shook my head firmly. No. You never notice the way he looks at people when he's listening closely? That's just how Daniel is. Yes, but sometimes those moments lasted a little longer. I felt a wave of irritation. You're rewriting my marriage to fit your feelings. I'm describing what I saw. Her voice wasn't defensive. If anything, it sounded almost sad. I spent years watching you two together, trying to convince myself there was nothing there. And eventually you convinced yourself there was. She didn't argue, but she didn't agree either. I think there are moments people don't fully understand while they're happening, she said quietly. Like what? Like the way someone's voice softens when they talk to you, or the way conversations stretch longer than they should because neither person wants them to end. I felt my chest tighten again. Are you saying those things happened between you and Daniel? Lila looked down at the table for a moment. Yes. The honesty in that single word filled the room smaller. But that doesn't mean anything happened, she added quickly. Except emotionally. She nodded. Except emotionally. For a moment, anger flared inside me again. So you've been building an emotional relationship with my husband for a year? We talked, she corrected, about your feelings. Sometimes. And he listened. Yes. The simplicity of her answers made them hurt even more. Why didn't you come to me instead? Her eyes lifted slowly. Because I knew what you would say. What? That I should stay away from him, which would have been the right thing to do. Yes, she admitted, but you didn't want to hear it. No. The honesty again. Lila had always been honest with me, even when we were teenagers. She had never been the type of person who hid behind polite lies. That same honesty now felt like a blade cutting through everything I thought was secure. Do you love him? I asked. Her answer came without hesitation. Yes. The word sounded simple, but it carried the weight of years. How long? I asked. She thought about that. Probably longer than I admitted to myself. Before he knew? Yes. Before I noticed? She nodded slowly. Probably. A heavy silence followed. Then Lila asked another question that caught me off guard. Do you remember the first dinner we had after you started dating him? The memory flickered in my mind. Yes. You were nervous about introducing him to me. I remember. I watched the way he looked at you that night. And I remember thinking you were very lucky. The statement sounded sincere. Then what changed? Nothing, she said. Then why are we here? Because sometimes admiration turns into something deeper. Her voice held a quiet sadness. And by the time you realize it, it's already too late to stop. The honesty of that confession left me momentarily speechless. Lila, so even if Daniel had feelings for you, which he says he doesn't, what exactly do you think would happen? She met my eyes steadily. I don't know. That's not a plan. It's not supposed to be. Then what is it? Possibility. The word felt fragile and dangerous at the same time. Possibility of what? Of honesty, she said. Of people acknowledging what they feel instead of burying it. And what happens to the people who get hurt in that process? Her gaze softened. That's the part I struggle with. The admission surprised me. You know this would destroy me, I said quietly. Yes, and you're still asking for it. She looked down at the table again. I'm asking for the truth. The room fell silent again. After a long moment, I spoke. Daniel told me something else. Lila looked up. What? He said you sometimes visited the house while I was at work. Her expression didn't change. Yes. Why? To talk. About him. About everything. And you didn't think that crossed a line? Her answer came softly. I thought the line had already been crossed the moment I realized how I felt. The honesty in her voice made my chest ache, but it didn't change the reality of the situation. You're still my best friend, I said slowly. Her eyes glistened slightly. I hope so. But tonight changed something. Yes, she whispered. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then I asked the question that had been sitting quietly in the back of my mind since the beginning of this conversation. Lila, if Daniel walked into this room right now and said he loved you, what would you do? She didn't hesitate. I would ask you if you could forgive me. The answer stunned me. Forgive you? Yes. For what? For loving the same person you do. The simplicity of the statement made my chest tighten again, because for the first time that night, I realized Lila didn't see herself as a villain in this story. She saw herself as simply someone who had fallen in love at the wrong time. And that belief made the situation far more complicated than I had ever imagined. Daniel's voice broke the quiet in the room, and suddenly the air felt heavier, as though every secret we'd been holding had condensed into a single moment. He stepped fully into the dining room, his hands resting lightly on the back of a chair, as if trying to ground himself before speaking. I noticed the faint tension in his shoulders, the same tension I had never seen before, and it made me realize just how much this night had affected him too. I need to say this, he began, his voice calm but carrying weight, because I haven't said it clearly before, and I don't want there to be any misunderstanding. Lila and I both turned our full attention to him. For years, I had been the one to interpret his silences, to read the pauses between his words. Tonight, the pauses had been deafening, but now he was speaking, and every word mattered. I love you, he said finally, looking directly at me. Relief and warmth surged through my chest in an instant, but it was immediately followed by a complicated ache. I knew this declaration didn't erase what had been revealed tonight. It only made it more layered, more intricate. And I need to be honest about something else, he continued, turning his gaze toward Lila. There were times when I imagined a different life, when I wondered, what if circumstances had been different? I won't lie about that. I felt a cold ripple move through me, the familiar ache of jealousy threatening to rise. But Daniel didn't pause, and I realized he had anticipated that feeling. But those thoughts, he said slowly, never meant I wanted that life. My heart has always been with you. My commitment has always been to you. I blinked rapidly, trying to absorb both the truth and the complexity. There had been imagined lives, conversations, moments of possibility, but none of them had been real. Lila's eyes glistened with unshed tears. She looked at him and then at me, as if to measure our reactions. "So what now?" I asked, finally, my voice shaking slightly. Daniel took a deep breath. "Now we acknowledge the truth. We acknowledge the feelings, but we also acknowledge our commitments. Nothing changes what we've built together. Nothing changes the life we share." Lila nodded slowly. Her fingers were clenched together, and I noticed the faint quiver in her lips. "I understand," she said quietly. "It's just harder than I expected. Admitting feelings isn't the same as acting on them." "I know," Daniel replied softly, "and you don't have to act on them. That's not fair to anyone. But we can all be honest without destroying what's already real." I let the weight of his words sink in. For a moment, I thought about the past year, about every moment I had unknowingly shared with someone who loved my husband, about every private visit, every quiet conversation, every emotional glance that Lila had held for him. And I realized something crucial. She had never crossed a line. She had never made a move, never tried to manipulate, never betrayed my trust in a tangible way. She had only existed in a complicated emotional space, and now she was leaving it. "I need a minute," I said quietly, standing up. My legs felt heavy as I walked toward the kitchen to pour a glass of water, needing a brief escape from the intensity of the room. The sound of water running into the glass was grounding, ordinary, and I clung to that sensation. When I returned, Lila and Daniel were still seated. I realized the enormity of the moment. Two people who had been deeply entwined in my life in both different ways, now facing each other with the truth fully exposed. "I want to say something," I began, my voice steadier now. "Lila, you've been my best friend for 20 years. Tonight was shocking, painful, confusing. But I also realized that you never intended to hurt me. You didn't manipulate him. You didn't lie about your feelings. You were honest. And that honesty is a kind of courage I can't deny." Her lips quivered as tears began to spill, but she nodded. "I didn't want to hurt you. I swear I didn't." "And Daniel," I turned to him, "I know there were thoughts, moments of imagining a different life, but your commitment to me, your love, your honesty tonight, that matters more than any fleeting fantasy. It's what keeps us together." Daniel reached for my hand. "It's what has always kept us together, and it always will." The room fell quiet, but this time it felt different. It was a quiet of understanding rather than tension, a quiet that acknowledged all the messy human emotions, all the possibilities, but also celebrated the truth that mattered most, our bond. Lila wiped her eyes and stood up. "I should go," she said softly. "I think I need to step back and process everything." "I understand. And I hope someday we can be friends again," she added, her voice barely above a whisper. "I hope so too," I said, meaning every word. As she walked toward the door, Daniel and I exchanged a glance that carried years of history and an unspoken promise. The difficult conversation had not destroyed us, it had clarified what mattered most. The front door clicked softly behind her. For a moment, the house felt impossibly quiet. And then Daniel stepped closer, wrapping his arms around me in a gentle hug. I rested my head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "We made it through," he whispered. "For now," I replied. But even in the uncertainty, I knew one thing. Honesty gave us a chance to rebuild, stronger and more real than before. We stood there for a long time, holding each other, absorbing the reality of what had happened. The love, the betrayal, the fear, and the loyalty, all mingled together in that quiet embrace. And in that moment, I understood the moral of the story that had unfolded tonight. Love is complicated, and so is friendship, but honesty and commitment have the power to navigate even the messiest of human emotions. Eventually, we pulled back, hands still intertwined, and looked around the room that it felt like a battlefield for the last few hours. But now it felt like a home again, imperfect, human, and deeply ours. And as I finally exhaled, I realized that the test of trust, the exposure of hidden feelings, and the confrontation with uncomfortable truths gave me something I never expected: clarity. Not just about Daniel or Lila or my marriage, but about myself. I had the strength to face the truth. I had the patience to listen. I had the courage to forgive. And most importantly, I had the heart to keep loving, even when life made no sense. Daniel leaned closer and whispered again, "No matter what comes next, we face it together." I nodded, together. And in that quiet moment, I knew we would. For a long moment after Leela said those words, I just stared at her. The dining room suddenly felt quieter than it ever had before. Outside, a car passed somewhere down the street, its headlights briefly sweeping across the window. But inside the house, everything remained still. "You'd ask for my forgiveness," I repeated slowly. "Yes. After telling me you love my husband." Leela's voice stayed gentle. "Yes." I leaned back in my chair, trying to understand the strange calmness she carried through this entire conversation. If our positions were reversed, I imagined I would be trembling with guilt or fear, but Leela didn't seem afraid of me. She seemed certain. "That's a very strange kind of apology," I said. "It's the only honest one I could offer," she replied. I rubbed my hands together slowly, feeling the weight of the evening pressing down on me. "You realize you're asking me to accept something most people would walk away from immediately." "I know." "Most people would end this friendship tonight." "I know that too." Her quiet acceptance made my chest tighten. "You're surprisingly calm about that possibility." She looked at me with tired eyes. "I've been preparing for it for a long time." The answer caught me off guard. "What do you mean?" "I knew the day might come when you discovered how I felt," she said, "and I knew you might never want to see me again after that." "Then why risk it?" Leela's voice softened. "Because pretending was starting to feel like a lie." I shook my head slightly. "You were lying to me." "Yes. At least you admitted." "I never wanted to," she said quietly. "But you did." "Yes." For a moment, we simply looked at each other across the table, two women who had once trusted each other with everything, now standing on opposite sides of something fragile and broken. Then Leela asked the question that surprised me. "What did Daniel look like when you asked him?" "What do you mean? Did he look guilty? Confused? Angry?" I considered the memory for a moment. "He looked tired," I said. Leela nodded slowly. "That sounds like him." "You seem to know him very well." "Maybe better than I should." The honesty of that statement sent another ripple of discomfort through me. "How many times did you visit him here?" "A handful," she replied. "That's vague." "Maybe 6 or 7 times." "And every one of those visits happened while I was at work." "Yes." "Did you ever think about how that might look if I found out?" "All the time." "Then why do it?" "Because those were the only moments we could talk honestly." The words made my chest tighten again. "Talk honestly about what?" "About feelings." "And about me?" "Yes." I exhaled slowly. "And what did he say about me?" He hesitated slightly before answering. He said you're the most loyal person he's ever known. The compliment felt strangely hollow under the circumstances. What else? He said you trust people more than they deserve sometimes. That stung a little. Did he say anything about being unhappy in our marriage? Her answer came quickly. No. That surprised me. Not once? Not once, she repeated. Then what exactly did you talk about during these private conversations? Leela thought for a moment. Mostly my feelings, she admitted. And he just listened. Yes. And occasionally imagined a different life. Her gaze softened slightly. Yes. The quiet confirmation sent a chill through me again. I stood up from the table and walked toward the window, staring out at the dark street. For years I had believed my life was simple. I had a husband who loved me, a best friend who supported me, a daughter who made everything worthwhile. Now 2 of those pillars had collided in a way I never saw coming. Do you remember the night before my wedding? I asked suddenly. Leela looked surprised by the question. Yes. You stayed up with me until 3 in the morning because I was nervous. I remember. You promised me that no matter what happened in life, we would always be there for each other. Her voice softened. I meant that. Did you? Yes. I turned to face her again. Then how does asking to share my husband fit into that promise? Leland looked genuinely pained now. It doesn't. Then ask. Because pretending nothing exists between us isn't helping anyone. Between you and Daniel. Yes. I shook my head slowly. There is no us between you and Daniel. You're right. There's just something unfinished. The phrase made my stomach twist. Unfinished? Yes. What exactly does that mean? It means feelings that never had a chance to become anything. And you think giving them that chance now is the solution. I think ignoring them forever might be worse. I studied her carefully. Worse for who? She didn't answer immediately. Probably me, she admitted. The honesty surprised me again. So this is really about you? Partly. And partly about Daniel? Yes. What about me? Her eyes softened. That's the part I wish didn't hurt. The quiet sincerity in her voice made the situation feel even more tragic. Because for all the anger and betrayal swirling through my chest, I could still see the person I had loved like a sister sitting across from me. I don't think you're a bad person, I said after a long pause. Leela looked startled. You don't? No. Her shoulders relaxed slightly. But I do think you've made a terrible choice tonight. She nodded slowly. I probably have. Probably? Almost certainly. The small attempt at humor fell flat between us. Leela, what do you actually want to happen? I asked. She looked down at her hands again. I don't know anymore. That's not true. She sighed quietly. I wanted clarity. And did you get it? Partly. Which part? She lifted her eyes to mine. The part where Daniel admitted he's imagined another life. The words made my chest tighten again. That's not the same as wanting it. I know. Then why does it matter so much to you? Her answer came softly. Because it means I wasn't completely alone in the feeling. The quiet vulnerability in her voice lingered in the room. But before I could respond, a sound came from the staircase behind us. Footsteps. Slow, careful footsteps. Leela's eyes shifted toward the hallway. I turned as well. And there, standing at the bottom step, was Daniel. He looked between the 2 of us with an expression I couldn't immediately read. For a moment, none of us spoke. Then Daniel said something that made my heart drop again. I think it's time I said something too. The next morning felt surreal. The sunlight filtered softly through the curtains, painting warm streaks across the bedroom. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, my mind replaying every word from the night before. Lila's confession, Daniel's honesty, the way our emotions had collided in the most unexpected way. It was exhausting, but also strangely freeing. Daniel stirred beside me, and I felt the familiar weight of comfort that had been our constant for so many years. He reached out, brushing a strand of hair from my face, and I realized that after the storm, nothing had changed between us. Not the love, not the commitment, not the life we had built together. "Morning," he said softly. His voice carried the same calm steadiness it always did, but there was a hint of something new, relief, perhaps, or a sense of closure. "Morning," I replied, turning to face him. He smiled faintly. "You okay?" I nodded slowly. "I think I am. Last night was hard, but I feel lighter somehow." "Good," he said. "I feel the same. Being honest, even when it's painful, it clears a path forward." I let out a slow breath, realizing that the tension I had carried for weeks, months even, had begun to dissolve. The nightmare of betrayal and confusion had passed through our home, and while it left scars, it also left a newfound clarity. After breakfast, Daniel and I talked quietly about the day ahead, our plans, and the small, ordinary things that felt like a balm to the soul. Life had a way of reminding us that even after chaos, there were moments of calm, and it was in these moments that we rebuilt our trust, not just with each other, but with ourselves. Later, I sent Lila a message, simple, honest, forgiving. "I hope we can talk soon, when you're ready. I still value our friendship." Her reply came quickly. "Thank you. I need time, but I hope so too." And that was enough for now, enough to know that bridges weren't burned, they were simply paused, waiting to be mended when hearts were ready. Over the next few weeks, life returned to its ordinary rhythm, but with subtle changes. Daniel and I spent more intentional time together, talking openly about everything, from our fears to our dreams. There was no pretense anymore, no unspoken questions hovering in the corners of our minds. Every glance, every conversation carried the weight of honesty, and it strengthened our bond in ways I hadn't thought possible. Lila gave us space, but we occasionally exchanged texts or small check-ins. She seemed to be finding her own balance, learning to navigate feelings she couldn't control, and I felt a cautious hope that one day we could restore the friendship that had meant so much to me. One evening, Daniel and I sat on the porch watching Emily play in the yard. The sun dipped low in the sky, casting golden hues across the grass. Daniel's hand found mine, and I felt the familiar warmth of love and safety. I never realized how fragile things can be, how one conversation, one hidden feeling can shift everything. Daniel squeezed my hand gently. "It's true, but I also realized how strong we are, strong enough to face it, strong enough to choose each other despite it." I leaned my head on his shoulder, feeling the rhythm of his heartbeat beneath me. "I love you," I whispered. "I love you too," he replied. And in that moment, I understood something profound. Love is not just about comfort or certainty. It's about honesty, forgiveness, and the courage to face truths, no matter how uncomfortable they are. It's about choosing each other every day, even when life presents difficult possibilities. Months passed, and slowly the pain of the past began to soften. Lila eventually reached out, and we met for coffee in a quiet cafe. We spoke carefully, honestly, without recrimination. The conversation was awkward at first, but over time it became easier. We laughed softly about memories, acknowledged the hurt without dwelling on it, and began the delicate work of rebuilding trust. I realized that forgiveness isn't just a gift we give to others, it's a gift we give ourselves. By choosing to forgive Lila, by choosing to trust Daniel again, by choosing to embrace honesty over fear, I found a peace I didn't know was possible. Life continued with its usual chaos and joy, but now it carried a deeper sense of clarity. Daniel and I were no longer living with unspoken questions or imagined possibilities. We faced the world together, fortified by the knowledge that honesty, courage, and love could overcome even the most complicated of human emotions. One night, as we tucked Emily into bed, Daniel and I shared a quiet smile across the doorway. She slept peacefully unaware of the storm that had passed through our lives, but we knew it had left us stronger. Later, as we sat on the couch, Daniel whispered, "We survived this, and we'll survive anything else life throws at us." I nodded, resting my head on his shoulder once more. "Together." "Together," he echoed. And as I closed my eyes that night, I realized that life isn't just about avoiding storms, it's about weathering them with honesty, courage, and love. It's about recognizing that even in the most painful moments, we can choose integrity over fear, truth over comfort, and love over resentment. Because in the end, that's what sustains us. That's what binds families, friendships, and marriages. That's what makes life not only bearable, but meaningful. And I knew with every fiber of my being that no confession, no hidden feeling, no imagined possibility could ever break what Daniel and I had built, because we had faced the truth together and come out stronger on the other side. The next morning felt surreal. The sunlight filtered softly through the curtains, painting warm streaks across the bedroom. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, my mind replaying every word from the night before. Lila's confession, Daniel's honesty, the way our emotions had collided in the most unexpected way. It was exhausting, but also strangely freeing. Daniel stirred beside me, and I felt the familiar weight of comfort that had been our constant for so many years. He reached out, brushing a strand of hair from my face, and I realized that after the storm, nothing had changed between us. Not the love, not the commitment, not the life we had built together. "Morning," he said softly. His voice carried the same calm steadiness it always did, but there was a hint of something new, relief, perhaps, or a sense of closure. "Morning," I replied, turning to face him. He smiled faintly. "You okay?" I nodded slowly. "I think I am. Last night was hard, but I feel lighter somehow." "Good," he said. "I feel the same. Being honest, even when it's painful, it clears a path forward." I let out a slow breath, realizing that the tension I had carried for weeks, months even, had begun to dissolve. The nightmare of betrayal and confusion had passed through our home, and while it left scars, it also left a newfound clarity. After breakfast, Daniel and I talked quietly about the day ahead, our plans, and the small, ordinary things that felt like a balm to the soul. Life had a way of reminding us that even after chaos, there were moments of calm, and it was in these moments that we rebuilt our trust, not just with each other, but with ourselves. Later, I sent Lila a message, simple, honest, forgiving. I hope we can talk soon, when you're ready. I still value our friendship. Her reply came quickly. Thank you. I need time, but I hope so too. And that was enough for now, enough to know that bridges weren't burned, they were simply paused, waiting to be mended when hearts were ready. Over the next few weeks, life returned to its ordinary rhythm, but with subtle changes. Daniel and I spent more intentional time together, talking openly about everything, from our fears to our dreams. There was no pretense anymore, no unspoken questions hovering in the corners of our minds. Every glance, every conversation carried the weight of honesty, and it strengthened our bond in ways I hadn't thought possible. Lila gave us space, but we occasionally exchanged texts or small check-ins. She seemed to be finding her own balance, learning to navigate feelings she couldn't control, and I felt a cautious hope that one day we could restore the friendship that had meant so much to me. One evening, Daniel and I sat on the porch watching Emily play in the yard. The sun dipped low in the sky, casting golden hues across the grass. Daniel's hand found mine, and I felt the familiar warmth of love and safety. I never realized how fragile things can be, how one conversation, one hidden feeling can shift everything. Daniel squeezed my hand gently. It's true, but I also realized how strong we are, strong enough to face it, strong enough to choose each other despite it. I leaned my head on his shoulder, feeling the rhythm of his heartbeat beneath me. I love you, I whispered. I love you too, he replied. And in that moment, I understood something profound. Love is not just about comfort or certainty. It's about honesty, forgiveness, and the courage to face truths, no matter how uncomfortable they are. It's about choosing each other every day, even when life presents difficult possibilities. Months passed, and slowly the pain of the past began to soften. Lila eventually reached out, and we met for coffee in a quiet cafe. We spoke carefully, honestly, without recrimination. The conversation was awkward at first, but over time it became easier. We laughed softly about memories, acknowledged the hurt without dwelling on it, and began the delicate work of rebuilding trust. I realized that forgiveness isn't just a gift we give to others, it's a gift we give ourselves. By choosing to forgive Lila, by choosing to trust Daniel again, by choosing to embrace honesty over fear, I found a peace I didn't know was possible. Life continued with its usual chaos and joy, but now it carried a deeper sense of clarity. Daniel and I were no longer living with unspoken questions or imagined possibilities. We faced the world together, fortified by the knowledge that honesty, courage, and love could overcome even the most complicated of human emotions. One night, as we tucked Emily into bed, Daniel and I shared a quiet smile across the doorway. She slept peacefully unaware of the storm that had passed through our lives, but we knew it had left us stronger. Later, as we sat on the couch, Daniel whispered, "We survived this, and we'll survive anything else life throws at us." I nodded, resting my head on his shoulder once more. Together. Together, he echoed. And as I closed my eyes that night, I realized that life isn't just about avoiding storms, it's about weathering them with honesty, courage, and love. It's about recognizing that even in the most painful moments, we can choose integrity over fear, truth over comfort, and love over resentment. Because in the end, that's what sustains us. That's what binds families, friendships, and marriages. That's what makes life not only bearable, but meaningful. And I knew with every fiber of my being that no confession, no hidden feeling, no imagined possibility could ever break what Daniel and I had built, because we had faced the truth together and come out stronger on the other side. The next morning felt surreal. The sunlight filtered softly through the curtains, painting warm streaks across the bedroom. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, my mind replaying every word from the night before. Lila's confession, Daniel's honesty, the way our emotions had collided in the most unexpected way. It was exhausting, but also strangely freeing. Daniel stirred beside me, and I felt the familiar weight of comfort that had been our constant for so many years. He reached out, brushing a strand of hair from my face, and I realized that after the storm, nothing had changed between us. Not the love, not the commitment, not the life we had built together. "Morning," he said softly. His voice carried the same calm steadiness it always did, but there was a hint of something new, relief, perhaps, or a sense of closure. "Morning," I replied, turning to face him. He smiled faintly. "You okay?" I nodded slowly. "I think I am. Last night was hard, but I feel lighter somehow." "Good," he said. "I feel the same. Being honest, even when it's painful, it clears a path forward." I let out a slow breath, realizing that the tension I had carried for weeks, months even, had begun to dissolve. The nightmare of betrayal and confusion had passed through our home, and while it left scars, it also left a newfound clarity. After breakfast, Daniel and I talked quietly about the day ahead, our plans, and the small, ordinary things that felt like a balm to the soul. Life had a way of reminding us that even after chaos, there were moments of calm, and it was in these moments that we rebuilt our trust, not just with each other, but with ourselves. Later, I sent Lila a message, simple, honest, forgiving. "I hope we can talk soon, when you're ready. I still value our friendship." Her reply came quickly. "Thank you. I need time, but I hope so too." And that was enough for now, enough to know that bridges weren't burned, they were simply paused, waiting to be mended when hearts were ready. Over the next few weeks, life returned to its ordinary rhythm, but with subtle changes. Daniel and I spent more intentional time together, talking openly about everything, from our fears to our dreams. There was no pretense anymore, no unspoken questions hovering in the corners of our minds. Every glance, every conversation carried the weight of honesty, and it strengthened our bond in ways I hadn't thought possible. Lila gave us space, but we occasionally exchanged texts or small check-ins. She seemed to be finding her own balance, learning to navigate feelings she couldn't control, and I felt a cautious hope that one day we could restore the friendship that had meant so much to me. One evening, Daniel and I sat on the porch watching Emily play in the yard. The sun dipped low in the sky, casting golden hues across the grass. Daniel's hand found mine, and I felt the familiar warmth of love and safety. I never realized how fragile things can be, how one conversation, one hidden feeling can shift everything. Daniel squeezed my hand gently. "It's true, but I also realized how strong we are, strong enough to face it, strong enough to choose each other despite it." I leaned my head on his shoulder, feeling the rhythm of his heartbeat beneath me. "I love you," I whispered. "I love you too," he replied. And in that moment, I understood something profound. Love is not just about comfort or certainty. It's about honesty, forgiveness, and the courage to face truths, no matter how uncomfortable they are. It's about choosing each other every day, even when life presents difficult possibilities. Months passed, and slowly the pain of the past began to soften. Lila eventually reached out, and we met for coffee in a quiet cafe. We spoke carefully, honestly, without recrimination. The conversation was awkward at first, but over time it became easier. We laughed softly about memories, acknowledged the hurt without dwelling on it, and began the delicate work of rebuilding trust. I realized that forgiveness isn't just a gift we give to others, it's a gift we give ourselves. By choosing to forgive Lila, by choosing to trust Daniel again, by choosing to embrace honesty over fear, I found a peace I didn't know was possible. Life continued with its usual chaos and joy, but now it carried a deeper sense of clarity. Daniel and I were no longer living with unspoken questions or imagined possibilities. We faced the world together, fortified by the knowledge that honesty, courage, and love could overcome even the most complicated of human emotions. One night, as we tucked Emily into bed, Daniel and I shared a quiet smile across the doorway. She slept peacefully unaware of the storm that had passed through our lives, but we knew it had left us stronger. Later, as we sat on the couch, Daniel whispered, "We survived this, and we'll survive anything else life throws at us." I nodded, resting my head on his shoulder once more. "Together." "Together," he echoed. And as I closed my eyes that night, I realized that life isn't just about avoiding storms, it's about weathering them with honesty, courage, and love. It's about recognizing that even in the most painful moments, we can choose integrity over fear, truth over comfort, and love over resentment. Because in the end, that's what sustains us. That's what binds families, friendships, and marriages. That's what makes life not only bearable, but meaningful. And I knew with every fiber of my being that no confession, no hidden feeling, no imagined possibility could ever break what Daniel and I had built, because we had faced the truth together and come out stronger on the other side. Before I begin, if you've ever lived through betrayal like this, please leave a comment, and subscribe to my YouTube channel. I used to believe that the strongest relationships in life were the ones that lasted the longest. Time felt like proof. If someone had been in your life for years, through heartbreak, weddings, births, and funerals, surely that meant they were permanent. Surely that meant they loved you. For most of my life, that belief had a name, and her name was Lila. Lila and I met when we were just 16 years old. We were both awkward girls, sitting alone in the back of our high school literature class, pretending to read while secretly hoping someone would talk to us. I remember the exact moment she leaned over and whispered, "Do you actually understand any of this Shakespeare stuff, or are we both pretending?" I laughed harder than I probably should have, and that moment sealed our friendship. From that day on, we were inseparable. We studied together, cried over first heartbreaks together, and dreamed about the futures we thought we deserved. Lila was bold in ways I wasn't. She spoke her mind without hesitation, wore bright colors when everyone else dressed safely, and never seemed afraid of the world. I admired that about her. When my father passed away during my first year of college, Lila slept on the floor of my bedroom for 2 weeks just to make sure I didn't have to fall asleep alone. When she broke off her engagement at 24 because she realized she didn't truly love the man she was about to marry, I drove 6 hours in the middle of the night to sit beside her while she cried. We weren't just friends. We were family. At least that's what I believed. I met Daniel 3 years later when I was 27. It was one of those small, ordinary meetings that eventually become the biggest turning points of your life. I had gone to a bookstore cafe on a rainy afternoon, hoping to spend a quiet hour with a novel and a cup of tea. Daniel was standing at the counter, arguing politely with the barista about whether cinnamon belonged in coffee. He looked back at me at one point and rolled his eyes with a smile, as if inviting me to share the joke. That small moment turned into a conversation, and that conversation turned into dinner later that week. Within months, I knew he was different from anyone I'd ever dated. Daniel had a quiet steadiness about him. He didn't rush decisions, he listened more than he spoke, and when he looked at you, it felt like he was truly paying attention to every word you said. When I introduced him to Leela, I remember feeling nervous in a way that surprised me. Leela's opinion mattered more to me than anyone else's. If she didn't like him, I knew it would weigh on my heart. But the moment they met, Leela hugged him warmly and said, "Well, if you can put up with her stubbornness, you're already a saint." We all laughed, and the tension I'd been holding melted away. Over the years, the three of us shared countless dinners, holidays, and celebrations. Leela became part of our marriage the same way she had been part of my life. She joined us for Sunday lunches. She helped decorate our home the first time we moved into a bigger place. When our daughter Emily was born, Leela was the first person outside our family to hold her. I trusted her completely. If someone had asked me then whether Leela would ever hurt me, I would have laughed at the idea. It simply wasn't possible in my mind. But sometimes the truth hides quietly inside ordinary moments, waiting for the right time to reveal itself. Looking back now, there were small things I didn't question back then. Leela always seemed especially interested in Daniel's opinions. She would ask him questions about his work, his childhood, his favorite music. At the time, I thought she was simply being friendly. She had always been curious about people. Occasionally, I noticed the way she looked at him when she thought no one was watching. It wasn't inappropriate exactly, just thoughtful, maybe a little intense, but I brushed those thoughts aside quickly. You don't suspect your best friend of betrayal. Your mind refuses to go there. Years passed peacefully. Daniel and I built a life together filled with the usual rhythms of marriage: work, school runs, grocery shopping, small arguments about things that didn't matter, quiet evenings watching movies after Emily went to bed. Leela remained a constant presence in our lives. She never married, though she dated occasionally. Whenever I asked why none of those relationships lasted, she would shrug and say, "Well, I guess I haven't met the right person yet." I believed her. I believed everything she told me. Then came the night everything changed. It was a simple dinner at our house. Emily had gone to sleep early because she had a school trip the next morning. Daniel was washing dishes in the kitchen, while Leela and I sat at the dining table with glasses of wine. The conversation started the way it always did: casual, easy, comfortable. We talked about work, about Emily's school project, about a new cafe that had opened downtown. Nothing felt unusual. Nothing felt wrong. But after Daniel finished the dishes and went upstairs to answer a work email, the atmosphere shifted in a way I still struggle to explain. Leela stared into her glass for a long time without speaking. I remember asking her if something was wrong. She looked up slowly, and there was a seriousness in her eyes that made my stomach tighten. She said, "There's something I've wanted to tell you for a long time." I assumed she was about to confess some personal problem, maybe another failed relationship or a struggle she had been hiding. I leaned forward, ready to listen. What she said next shattered the entire foundation of the life I thought I understood. She took a slow breath and said, "I think Daniel and I were supposed to be together." At first, I laughed because the statement sounded so strange. I thought she was joking, but she didn't smile. Her eyes stayed locked on mine with a strange, steady intensity. Leela, I said gently, what do you mean by that? She placed her glass on the cable and folded her hands together. I loved him before you did, before you even met him. My mind struggled to process the sentence. It felt like hearing words in a language I didn't understand. That doesn't make sense, I said slowly. You didn't know Daniel before I did. Leela shook her head slightly, almost sadly. No, but when you first told me about him, before I met him, the way you described him, something inside me just knew. I felt a cold sensation crawl up my spine. Leela, I whispered, you're scaring me. Then she said the words that would echo in my mind for months afterwards. She said, I think fate made a mistake, and maybe there's a way to fix it if you're willing to understand. I stared at her, unsure whether I had heard correctly. What are you saying? She looked at me with a calmness that felt almost surreal. She said, I'm saying maybe Daniel doesn't have to belong to just one of us.